Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, or if you're new here, welcome officially to the channel. This, as you know from the intro, was a series where I go into odd game accessories or peripherals that developers made to get us more into the game mentally or physically. Today I have one that's likely one of the earliest bulk media storages for a console, the Nintendo 64DD. Now, to talk about this we have to go back a ways, around 1993, when Nintendo was still working on its newest console concept, Project Reality. This would eventually become known as Project Dolphin, Ultra 64, until eventually landing on Nintendo 64. Nintendo was heavily debating on what kind of format to use for their new console, as CDs were becoming more and more mainstream, leaving them with a bit of a dilemma. Howard Lincoln, the chairman of Nintendo of America, had this to say on it. Right now, cartridges offer faster access time and more speed of movement and characters in CDs. So, we'll introduce our new hardware with cartridges. But eventually, these problems with CDs will be overcome. When that happens, you'll see Nintendo using CD as a software storage medium for our 64-bit system. This was, as we know, never to really become to fruition, and many of us, including myself, have talked at great length on how nice it was to have faster access to the cartridge, but were frustrated at the choice to remain with it due to the lack of storage. That's where the 64DD started to come into focus. Nintendo was looking at new options to add to the console later to expand on its capabilities, and even Jim Merrick, one of the software engineer managers at the time, had this to say: "We're very sensitive to the cost of the console. We could get an 8-speed CD-ROM mechanism in the unit, but in an under $200 console market, it would be very hard to pull that off." Eventually, they would decide to start working on a type of floppy disk system very similar to what they had used in the Famicom. This would allow more flexibility, or as game designer Shigesato Itoi put it, CD holds a lot of data. DD holds a moderate amount of data and backs the data up, and the cartridge/ROMs hold the least amount of data but process it the fastest. By attaching a DD to the game console, we can drastically increase the number of possible genres. However, what was this thing, and how did it really work? Let's take a look and see how this thing was supposed to work, and eventually what mostly seemed to lead to its downfall, shall we? The Nintendo 64D was essentially a floppy disk attachment that connected to the bottom of your N64, much like the Famicom floppy disk of the day. This acted as a floppy drive that would hold an extra 64 meg of data that honestly didn't seem like much when compared to the 650 meg of CDs back in the day. These floppies were enclosed in a more hard plastic, much like the zip disk, if any of you remember that short-lived format. This made them more durable than the floppy format of the day and allowed some more flexibility in what the N64 would be able to do overall. Let me explain. One way of utilizing it would be to cut developer costs. What this meant is developers could opt to make a 64DD only game that not only gave them more room, but would be cheaper to manufacture than going the cartridge route, but be a little bit slower to load. A second way is they could use it in conjunction with existing games. Since half of the data on the floppy was writable, it would allow users not only to store, but potentially make textures that could allow for map design and storage of those maps. This is pretty common today, but at the time, this would have been a fairly new concept to the console gaming scene. The other way that this could be utilized is for things like expansion packs, updated rosters, etc. This would add more life to games that customers already owned. Another nice feature that was added is a persistent clock, complete with battery backup. This was intended to allow persistent worlds. The clock would allow games to keep track of time even with the loss of power, and allow players to do things like raise animals or grow crops without losing time due to the loss of power. On top of this, the 64DD launched with a subscription service called RadNetDD. This allowed users to do email, chat, play games online, and read special Nintendo newsletters. The service was short-lived though, only running from 1999 to 2001, closing down in part because of the launch of the GameCube. Another reason the system and its services were short-lived as well is that it had so many delays in release that many of the titles that were meant to push the system were converted over to cartridges, like Ocarina of Time. Many others that were slated to be ported went to other systems, leaving the DD with a fairly limited library overall. And an even more limited release is that it only ever launched in Japan. What do you guys think of this one though? Are any of you a fan of this one? Did any of you ever have one, and if so, how much did you use it? Let me know in the comments. However, for now, thank you so much for watching and spending part of your day with me. If I could ask you for one more favor, please leave this video a like. And if you haven't, consider subscribing. It really does help me out. For now though, thank you once again, and until next time, happy gaming.